And what an honor and a privilege to be joined by or with Michael Swain. And today we're chatting to Michael Swain, Executive Director of Freedom of Religion South Africa, also known as 4SA. 4SA works in the field of religious freedom to protect our rights to religious freedom. We are talking today about the hate speech bill, which is open for public comment until the 1st of October. So, Michael, thank you so much for your time. And just wanting to check if we've got you there. Michael, are you there?
Jonathan, good morning. And always great to be with you in Breakfast with Friends.
Thank you so much and really appreciate your time. So, Michael, talk to us about what is the bill all about?
Well, this is a bill that's been in Parliament before. It was introduced to Parliament in 2018 and was then taken off the table, really waiting on the Kulani case. You might remember we talked about the case with John Kulani, where the Constitutional Court were really having to decide whether or not the definition for hate speech in PAPUDA is the Promotion of Equality and the Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. And we had an amendment bill, you might recall, not so long ago that was also around PAPUDA. But this case before the Constitutional Court, the Kulani case, really was to decide whether or not its definition of hate speech, which was very, very broad, was in fact constitutional. But the hate speech bill goes further. You see, PAPUDA essentially opens up what they call a civil action. In other words, you can be sanctioned in some way, typically a fine. You may be asked to do community service, make a public apology. But the hate speech bill, for the first time in South African history, will make something that you say a criminal offence. And clause 6 of this bill makes hate speech an offence carrying a 3-year jail sentence and or a limitless fine for a first offence, and a 5-year jail sentence and or a limitless fine for a second offence. So this really takes it to a very, very different level. And I think it's important to bear in mind that, of course, the broader the definition of hate speech on the one hand, and also the more severe the sanctions for hate speech on the other, these are things that obviously impact indirectly, never mind directly, freedom of speech. If you think that something that you say may literally end up with you being arrested, charged, taken to court, and if found guilty, sent to jail for 3 years or given a massive fine, well, that might very well make you think twice before you say something that you might otherwise have felt that you could freely say.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where and exactly why we have to highlight this, because it has a massive effect on our religious freedom. But how exactly does it have an effect on our religious freedom?
Well, it's probably worth going back to what the Constitutional Court said in the judgment in the Kulani case, because they actually struck down the definition of hate speech in PAPUDA, which was overly broad. And they redefined it as follows. No person may publish, propagate, advocate, or communicate words that are based on one or more of the prohibited grounds. Now, those grounds are things like race and sex and gender and HIV status and so on and so forth. And then it goes on, against any person that could reasonably be construed to demonstrate a clear intention to be harmful or to incite harm and to promote or propagate hatred. So that is fairly close to the constitutional definition of hate speech, which is an advocacy to hatred and an incitement to do harm. So that was, we felt, a reasonable outcome for that. And very quickly onto the table, of course, came the hate speech bill back, essentially, because they were really waiting for this. But here's the problem. Under the hate speech bill, the clause there for hate speech is wider. It says any person who intentionally publishes, propagates, advocates anything or communicates to one or more persons in a manner, and here we go, this is the critical part, that could reasonably be construed to demonstrate a clear intention to be harmful or to incite harm or to propagate and promote hatred. And there you've got an or. So whereas in the first instance you have an and, in other words, it must be an advocacy to hatred and an incitement to do harm. Here it could be one or the other, it could be both. But the problem is this, that as soon as you put an or in instead of an and, of course, the net widens considerably, because once you've perhaps shown an intention to be harmful, then that would amount to the crime of hate speech. And just so that you know, harm is defined as any emotional, psychological, physical, social, or economic harm. And if you think about it, in a world that we live in, of course, political correctness is definitely, and cancel culture is definitely on the up and up. And that would mean that if you made some statement, particularly as an individual, because we'll get to the defense for religious freedom in a minute, particularly as an individual, that might be construed by somebody who hears it or perhaps reads it on your social media as harmful. In other words, that did me some psychological or emotional harm. You could literally find yourself arrested, charged, and if convicted, in jail simply for something that you said.
That is a scary, scary thought. And that's why we need to hear this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've just tuned in, we're chatting to Michael Swain. He's the Executive Director of Freedom of Religion South Africa. And we're talking about the hate speech bill. And we're going to tell you in a moment where you need to go to find out more with regard to this. But Michael, could you give us an example of where religious people or organizations were taken to court for something that they actually said?
Well, one of the original cases that we were involved with was where a pastor of a local church was simply speaking about sex and sexuality, which is a perfectly valid subject to speak about in any religious gathering for that matter. And he was making the point that although sex is God's idea, not all forms of sex are acceptable to him. And sexual morality is also very important. And particularly that would have offended people who, for example, are of a same-sex orientation. And it did. And he was taken to court by the Gender Equality Commission. And fortunately, that case was successfully defended. But it just, again, goes to demonstrate the fact that simply because he said something in a message he preached on a Sunday that was recorded and then sent on to the Commission for Gender Equality, who then took action. It just goes to show how quickly that can happen. And again, another case we're dealing with in Chatsworth at the moment, where a young evangelist was quoting scriptures. And albeit he did say that he was once of a certain religion and now he converted and he couldn't see why anybody would be of the first religion that he was in. But again, that isn't the point. The point is that you are allowed in South African law to express your faith, to say what you want. And simply because you're offended, that should certainly not mean that you can take somebody to court. And so again, we have to defend that. But that is under, by the way, that is under the Papuda legislation. And another question that we have, sorry, Jonathan, I know you're about to ask me another question.
No problem.
So another question that we have about this hate speech bill is, why do we need it in the first place? Because you see, we do have Papuda, and that Papuda definition has just been redefined by the Constitutional Court. There is also, worth bearing in mind, that there is a common law offence, which is a criminal offence. It's called crimen injuria. And you might recall Penny Sparrow and Vicky Momberg, for example. Yeah. They made very egregious racist remarks. So if you say something that is so kind of reprehensible that it amounts to an assault or an undermining of their human dignity, that is a criminal offence. And both Penny Momberg and Vicky Sparrow, Penny Sparrow and Vicky Momberg rather, were found guilty of crimen injuria. So we have in law protection against people who say things that are just beyond the pale, so to speak. Why do we need something which will criminalize hate speech at this time?
Yeah, no, really a good question. So we need our listeners to get involved and to give their input with regard to this hate speech bill. Quickly, as we wrap it up, Michael, because we don't have a lot of time, could you just guide us as to where do listeners go to make sure that they're informed and that they then submit some form of a response and give input with regard to the bill?
Well, again, very important. And thank you, Jonathan. Make your voice heard. If you send a submission in, you will be registering your objection to this. And we strongly recommend that you do. You can go to our website, that's forsa.org.za. And there's an image there under the spotlight. You can click on that. You can either make a personal submission, and we would encourage you to do that. It's simple to do it. It will literally take you 5 minutes. You go to the Dear SA platform that we've teamed up with for this one, again, as we did with Papuda. And in 5 minutes' time, you can make your submission and have your voice heard. And if you are, of course, an organization, you can, again, click. There's another button, and it will download a pro forma template, and you can copy, paste it, or add to it, put it on your letterhead, and send it in. But we must act seriously. We were successful the last time when this came up to actually object to get some level of religious freedom protection. And there is a clause. But again, that clause, according to the minister, will only protect pastors and imams or whoever from the pulpit on a Sunday. If you repeat exactly what they said on the Monday, you could literally find yourself in jail. So if you want to have your voice heard, and we say, please come on, South Africa, do not just sleep and let this thing slide by you. Just go onto the 4SA website, forsa.org.za, click on the image, the individual submission, and make your voice heard today. We only have until the 1st of October. They would not grant an extension on this. They gave literally 24 days within which you had to make a comment. So you have no time to waste.
Sure. And really want to encourage all pastors and you as a congregant, as a saint, as a believer, please make sure that you're also reaching out to your pastor and saying, hey, pastor, have you heard about this hate speech bill and that we need to submit an application, that we need to fight this thing? Because this is such a big, big thing. And it's not that we are saying it's okay to, hate on people and things like that. No. This is about religious freedom. If I stand up for what I believe, and if I say, well, this is my conviction and this is what my Bible says and so forth, that I need to have that freedom to express that in our beautiful society. Michael, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. And again, just a quick reminder, you can find out more by going to their website, www.4sa.org.za. That's www.4sa.org.za. Michael Swain, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Jonathan.
You're so welcome.